Hi guys, my name is Amish Tripathi and I'm the director of the Nehru Centre. The Nehru Centre is the cultural wing of the Indian High Commission in the UK, and we've been in existence for many decades, and we organize wonderful events at this very auditorium, which is in Mayfair in central London. Sadly, as you can see, the auditorium is empty. It has been empty since we were all put into lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. But what we Indians believe is that the other side of a crisis is an opportunity. And what we have done at the Nehru Centre is moved all our events online. So now if you attend our online events, every single seat is a VIP seat. Like you get a front row at our events. No trouble of parking, no trouble of travelling all the way. And most practically all the programs that we would do, like literary discussions and dance performances, musical performances. We are doing them all on our online channels. You can register for our newsletter at our website nehrucentre.org.uk. You don't need to write them down. They will be displayed at the bottom of the screen. You can also come to our Facebook page, which is a verified page, the Nehru Centre. You can follow updates on all our events on Twitter as well, the Nehru Centre. That's also a verified account. Or you can come to our YouTube channel. Again, the Nehru Centre. We are nothing if not consistent. I hope you do come to our online channels and enjoy the events that we are putting up for you. Thank you so much for all your love and support. Namaste. Jai Hind.
Hi guys, this is Amish. I'm the director of the Nehru Centre, and as you can see, I'm wearing a pinstripe shirt. You know, the kind of shirts that that I used to wear when I was in banking, and a world that I left 10 years ago. I'm coming back to that world because I'm actually discussing one of the most wonderful books on economics and India's journey that I've read in the recent past. And the person I will be in conversation with is one of the best economists across the world, Padma Bhushan Arvind Panagariya ji. If he could be just brought up on stage. Namaste Arvind ji, how are you?
Namaste, very well. Very, very honored to be with you, Amish. It's a great privilege for me.
Thank you. And the privilege is all mine, I must say that.
Well, you live in the hearts of all Indians. So it's wonderful to be with you.
Thank you, Arvind ji. Before we start the program, if I can do the formalities,
Yes.
I'd love to read your introduction out first, and then we will launch your book, because this is the online launch of your latest book, India Unlimited. We will do that, and we'll not have the pleasure of ripping apart the wrapping paper and all that, but we'll do it online, and then post that we'll begin our conversation. So if I can start with your introduction first. Dr. Arvind Panagariya ji is a professor of economics and the Jagdish Bhagwati Professor of Indian Political Economy at Columbia University. From January 2015 to August 2017, he served as the first Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, the Government of India, in the rank of a Cabinet Minister. During these years, he also served as India's G20 Sherpa and led the Indian teams that negotiated the G20 communiques during the presidencies of Turkey, China, and Germany. Professor Panagariya is a former chief economist of the Asian Development Bank and was on the faculty of the Department of Economics at the University of Maryland at College Park from 1978 to 2003. During these years, he also worked with the World Bank, IMF, and UNCTAD in various capacities. He holds a PhD degrees in economics from Princeton University, truly a CV to die for. Professor Panagariya has authored more than 15 books. I still haven't crossed his number. I'm hoping to cross those number of books sometime. His book, India, the Emerging Giant, was listed as a top pick of 2018 by The Economist, which is headquartered right here in London, and described as a definitive book on the Indian economy by Fareed Zakaria of the CNN, our own fellow Desi, who has shifted to the US. The Economist has described his book Why Growth Matters with Jagdish Bhagwati ji as a manifesto for policymakers and analysts. Scientific papers by Professor Panagariya have appeared in the top economics journals such as the American Economic Review, Quarterly Journal of Economics, Review of Economic Studies, and International Economic Review, while policy papers by him have appeared in the Foreign Affairs and Foreign Policy. In March 2012, the Government of India honored Professor Panagariya with a Padma Bhushan, the third highest civilian honor the country bestows in any field. What an honor to be doing this introduction to such an accomplished man.
All honor is mine, Amish, to be with you.
Thank you. And Arvindji, before we start our conversation, I thought let's have the unveiling of your book. So if the team can just carry out.
So if I may interject here, Amish, this may be a little bit of surprise for you too. Okay. I worked backstage with Vineet on this. So the book actually was released originally in India under the title India Unlimited. Right. And now it has just been released in the rest of the world under the title New India. So this is why you saw the two sort of cover pages. For the rest of the world, it's coming as New India, Reclaiming the Lost Glory. And in India, of course, it was released many months ago under the title India Unlimited.
Which is why I refer to it as India Unlimited.
Yes.
But the New India is India Unlimited. So
yes, of course. Of course.
Arvindji, if I may begin our conversation, considering our audience, many of them are bankers, many of them are economists, many of them could be in other fields who may not know as much about economics. So the first question I thought I would explore with you, and it may appear kind of obvious, but considering that much of our audience, may be experts in other fields, but not necessarily in economics or banking or finance. So I thought I'd ask you this, an interesting question. I mean, building on Adam Smith's thought that why are some countries rich, some countries not. It might surprise many people to know that, of course, India's per capita income was ahead of China's till as late as the 1990s. But it might truly surprise people to know that Pakistan's per capita income was ahead of India's and China's till the 1990s. It's really difficult to believe, but there you are. What is it about, one is obviously not as interested in the economic situation of Pakistan, but why do you think India's per capita income remains poor? We have grown well over the last 30 years. What is it about countries that generates this growth in per capita income, and why is it that we've done well in the last 30 years, but to be fair, we could have done a lot more?
Absolutely.
What is the big picture view?
Right. No, I think this is the most fundamental question you have asked. And believe it or not, economists don't always agree on this question as well. They normally don't agree, and on this one, the disagreements remain also.
There is that famous line that if you put 10 economists in a room, you'll get 11 opinions.
That's right. Absolutely. Never put 10, 2 is enough to. The room is enough, actually. But to sort of squarely answer, at least my answer to it, with which others may disagree, you certainly need one thing, that political stability has to be there. Because economic policy, even good economic policies, cannot give you results if political instability is there, because investors will not come in and so forth. So political stability is quite important, and it's hard to find any country which has really grown on a sustained basis, even 2 to 3 decades, without political stability. So I take that as given. I think once you are past that, economic policies matter. And India is perhaps really the best example of that, because we have had political stability throughout. After independence, we remained completely stable. A lot of people, some of the authors in the early years had been predicting that India will disintegrate because of its because of the diversity of its languages, cultures, caste system, this, that, and the other. Didn't happen. Actually, India held together extremely well. So politically, we remained quite stable throughout. Yet our performance has been very variable actually over time. If I take just a very, very rough cut, extremely rough cut, to highlight how different it has been. So if we say that our per capita income in 1950 was, say, about 100 rupees per week, these are in 2004 prices we can take, but that's in real terms. 100, let's say we say in 1950, it took us 50 years to go to, meaning, so 2000, we came from 1950 to 2050 years, we came to about 300. Today, our income is already about 830 or so in comparable real value. So you can see a big difference, even in the last 20 years. Even in the last 20 years, big difference, because we have.
If I may, just for those who don't know economics, the difference between real and nominal takes inflation into account. Right. Real is,
we correct for inflation. So with zero. Yeah. So if there was no inflation, if there was no inflation, income was then 100 in 1950, 300 in 2000, and then today 800 plus in 2020, let's say 2019, last full year that we have. So that tells you, so why, right? Why did it happen? It's not that intentions of our leadership were any worse, and we are conversing. You are conversing from the Nehru Centre, and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was our first prime minister, and he clearly believed that poverty was India's biggest problem, and that's what he wanted to fight. And he also got the instrument right. He actually wrote various places that we need to grow much faster, that our current income is so low that any attempts to redistribute will go nowhere, because there are so many to redistribute to and so few from whom to redistribute. So therefore, redistribution simply couldn't go very far. And so he realized that we needed to grow. Now, so two very important things he got right, that poverty was the objective, removal of poverty was the objective, growth was the instrument. But then he got the policy framework completely wrong. So he was also very influenced by the Soviet Union experience, was educated in Britain. So he was a Fabian socialist. And so all the command and control system he adopted, and the policy of almost no trade, so that we've got to produce everything that we consume. So that framework really produced very, very low growth. So you 1950 to 1980, we grew about less than 4% a year, with population growth higher than 2%. Growth in per capita terms was like 1.8, 1.9%. 1980 is slightly better, but still not quite good. 91, watershed year, Narasimha Rao, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, decided to change tracks. He said, we are going to return to come to market economy. He launched the reforms. Now, democracy reforms really go slowly. And, some leaders come in and they accelerate. So we got, still in 5 years of Narasimha Rao, we got reforms. Then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee carried that way forward. In 6 years, he made lots of progress. And I think then we lost about 10 years under UPA. Some reforms happened under the United Progressive Alliance government, but there was a great slowdown, particularly in the second term of the UPA. And again, now, last 6 years, we are back on reforms. And I should say that, last week for me has been absolutely a watershed week. Quite a bit of my book now has already been made redundant by the reforms that have already happened, both in agriculture and labor markets. And higher education also, particularly the medical education. So
True.
within last week, big
Massive.
reforms. And so those, I think, it is ultimately those reforms which so suddenly gave us a big jump on growth rate, and therefore we saw this bigger progress. But just one last point is that history matters, you see, because countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, they got onto those right policy frameworks much earlier in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So they got early start, and once you start early, even though later you slow down, you are already well ahead of us, of everybody else. And China, same way, started in 1980, and it really went then very fast. Ours, I think change in democracy is a little harder, slower. So I mean, we still have things that are from the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's era, which need to be changed, and yet we are still struggling to change those. And then there were some more mistakes got made during the second term of the UPA, which also need again a bit of change. But that's a bit of a price you pay for democracy. I mean, I'm happy actually. I would rather take that price than go the Chinese way or the Korean way in the 60s and 70s. So that's my sort of rough answer. The policies matter in the end once you got the political stability.
So Arvindji, in fact, there's a question that comes in my mind, which is outside of the questions I'd listed, but drawing off your answer. There is no doubt for those of us who follow finance, the last week, 2 weeks, in terms of reforms, have been dramatic. In terms of agriculture, the reforms that have happened it's almost like a 1991 moment. What has happened in agriculture? The labor reforms that have come in. Now, if I can get a sense from you on why these reforms are important, if you agree that they are important. And a second corollary to this, which you also alluded to, that a large part of your success is what you do and what the global scenario is. In that mythical, in the legendary battle between Arjun and Karna, when Lord Krishna praised Karna for pushing Arjun's chariot back by just a little bit, whereas Arjun had pushed Karna's chariot back quite a lot, because Lord Krishna told him that you have Lord Krishna himself sitting on your chariot, you have Hanumanji on your flag, so the tide was against Karna, so he pushed you back so much. So the atmosphere has an impact as well. So that's the second part of the question. I thought if you can expand on that. These reforms may be important, but is the era of unfettered globalization behind us? And does that put in a long-term headwind on us over the next few decades? And how does that play out? So first on the reforms, second on how the global mood over the next 20 years could impact our growth story.
Yeah. First, on the reforms, I'd simply say this, that there is a lag between the reforms being introduced and the response having happened, and we have the best example from our own experience that when reforms were done for 5 years by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, then for 6 years by Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, then finally starting with 2003-04, we began to grow at 8% plus, and we did that for almost a whole decade. So that, I think, this lag, and also therefore the reforms that we have done now under Prime Minister Modi, I have absolutely no doubt that they will bear fruit. We will grow back to 7 to 8%, but there will be some lag. So we'll wait for that. Now, era of globalization, I think this is something that is invoked quite commonly by the critics of reforms, by also the critics of the market model. But let me just give you some numbers again, at the risk of losing maybe some readers, but I think they should be able to follow. When China was globalizing, so let's go back to year 2000 or so, the global exports in merchandise goods was about $6 trillion. And services may have been maybe another 2 trillion or so, probably not even 2 at the time. So in any case, well below $10 trillion total global market in exports. Today, now, if we take 2019, that market is about only merchandise goods is about 17 trillion, 17 to 18 trillion, and another 7 trillion from the services. So you're talking about $25 trillion export market. Now, even if there are headwinds and this falls tomorrow by 2 trillion, 3 trillion because of COVID, other things and all, it still is going to stay an extremely large market. What we have not successfully done still is to get a very large share in this pie. Our share in this market in goods exports has been about 1.7% compared to China's 12 to 13%. And in services, we have a little larger share, maybe between around 2.5%, maybe. But that's about it. Even in services, because of the size, China has a larger share in the global economy than we do. So if we really can raise our share just to 4 to 5%, that will be a huge kind of gain for us, huge gain. And so I personally don't think that the global market is a barrier if we set our house in order, if we really, I argue in this book, India Unlimited, that what we are lacking is the preponderance of medium and large firms. We have emphasized too much the micro and small, which also flourish well if medium and small firms are also in large numbers in the market. Our problem has been that our workforce, like almost 85 to 90% of the workforce that is non-agricultural, is still employed in micro and small enterprises, which a lot of it is self-employment. So there the productivity tends to be very low. And so globalization will only help us because medium and large firms operate in the global economy. They compete against the best in the world. I like to give our example from our favorite sport, both for UK and for India, cricket, that if we are today able to produce a series of these fantastic players, from Sehwag to Yuvraj to Tendulkar to Kohli to MS Dhoni and so forth, it's because we are playing world-class cricket, right? We are playing test matches, we are playing one-day cricket also. And the intensity of that play, international games, has gone up quite dramatically in the recent years, and that sort of has produced one after the other incredible cricket players. I think with world markets, the same thing. And goods and services, when you compete against the best in the world, you learn from them, you teach them, and you get better. It also in the manufacturing, it also gives you the scale. Because no matter how big your market is, ours has grown bigger, but still, overall we are at 2.8, 2.9 trillion, maybe $3 trillion economy today. That's still small when you think of global economy being about 17 to 18 trillion purely in terms of exports of goods. So that's really the crux of the matter, and that's why I think we can still benefit greatly from globalization.
Going on this subject, I take your point completely on headwinds or not, there are opportunities, and there is this other perspective which is also spoken of as a headwind, which you refer to in your book, of automation.
Yes.
That there is this fear. People say that the Indian manufacturing story will end even before it takes off, and you spoke of robophobia. Interestingly, so what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, so I argue there that look, first, I'll come to the more general point, but first take a couple of examples. Right, we were saying that these automated cars, the electric vehicles, etc., were going to be there, and also the self-driving cars. I think when we talk automation, self-driving cars is probably a better example. Now, at least a decade they've been there. Innovation-wise, they exist. They've not been adopted, and not a single country in a single city actually has adopted these. So the mere fact of innovation doesn't mean that conventional technology is going to be displaced just like that. There are a lot of issues that have to be sorted out before actually the threatening technology gets adopted, and that's where the robophobia is, right? That all robots will take over, manufacturing will return to America, and so forth. But here is one simple example. Today, the world's population is about 7 to 8 billion. Somewhere the figure is somewhere in between those figures, 7 to 8 billion. Let's take 7 billion. Even if one person wears 2 shirts per year, one person purchases, let's say, 2 shirts a year and 2 trousers a year. That's 14 billion trousers and 14 billion shirts to produce. Somebody is going to produce those. Now, today, as far as clothing is concerned, we do not even have actually an innovation, credible innovation, where human hands can be replaced by technology. Today, the stitching and everything is still principally, people, of course, some machines are used in the manufacture of clothing, but largely it is a very labor-intensive activity. And even innovation-wise, because handling for the robots to handle the soft material is a challenge. So stitching is still not possible in a credible way by machines. Some kind of remote innovations have happened, but not quite credible ones. Now, on top of that, think of the commercialization, right? Innovation technologically something may become feasible, but is it commercially viable? Can it do it at a lower cost than the human hands can do? And that also in a country where you got 500 million workers, relatively low wages. The answer here again is that automation has limits. Apparently, one of the 2 manufacturers, I think Adidas, probably they had tried to automate the manufacturing of shoes. One factory was put up in Germany, another in Atlanta in the US. They've closed down those factories, moved to China because commercially they turn out to be not so viable. So there are activities which can employ potentially a very large number of workers: clothing, footwear, furniture. A lot of light manufacturers still remain, labor intensive. So there are those activities that still remain, which will be done by human hands. And for the next 2 decades, I don't think that is going to go away. Automation will continue, but its adaptation will be slower and all. So there's one factor, but also there's the other factor that even though it is true that labor use per unit of manufacturing of any product, whether it's automobiles or even clothing, labor use per unit, per shirt, per car has declined. But we are buying many more cars today, many more shirts today. So the market is also expanding. So absolute demand, therefore, for labor doesn't decline in the end. So I remain convinced that if we put in good policies in place, which we have been doing, and many thanks to the last week's reforms, I think we'll see, and more to come, I hope. So I think we'll get there, and I don't see that these are any barriers for our growth, meaning either the global market size itself. People also refer to protectionism in the other countries and so forth, automation, but you can take into all of that, and still I think if we have competitive industry, a substantial number of medium and large firms entering the market, I think we'll be competitive in the global economy. We will be able to exploit it.
No, and you spoke of a shoe manufacturing facility moving to China, which brings a question in mind on China, but we'll come to that. If we can just take a short break, and we'll be back in a minute. Don't go anywhere. Just hang on and see this wonderful ad of Incredible India as you wait.
Luxury. In India, I discovered that true luxury isn't something you buy off a shelf. True luxury is a feeling that you are the Maharani of your world, and it can be all designed around you. All the beauty is yours. All the music is yours. India showed me that luxury doesn't follow designers and brands. True luxury follows its own heart.
Incredible India. India.
Thank you. Welcome back. Arvindji, before the break, we spoke briefly on China. So, I mean, straight up, given the border tensions with China, how should India approach? I'm not asking for your views on the border situation with China, but how should India approach trade with China, given these tensions?
Yeah, so that is, I mean, so let me first say as a matter of background that I had been arguing very much until quite recently, until before Galwan Valley incidents that happened, that India should become a part of, should sign off eventually on RCEP. This is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that 16 Asian countries, including India and China, were negotiating. And India had actually in 2019 negotiations chosen not to sign off on it. And I saw that at the time. My view was that, well, perhaps the deal was not good enough for India and we should negotiate better deal, but eventually we should sign it. After Galwan Valley incidents, I have changed my mind. I mean, one was already getting these signals that China was coming across as a very aggressive and belligerent power. Although, with Prime Minister Modi and President Xi, chemistry looked good, and it seemed that our own relations with them will remain fine, but not so. I think, China showed a very, very, very aggressive, belligerent side of it to India as well at Galwan Valley. And after that, I came to the conclusion that no, we cannot trust China. And so I have changed my mind. So I no longer support India signing RCEP. Also, I feel that India will need to distance itself, will need to distance itself from China on trade. Because you see, if you get very integrated deeply with China on international trade, meaning economically, therefore, there is a risk now, that it's not pretty clear that all the decisions in China get made ultimately big ones by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, and the Communist Party of China. Okay, so in the end, if they see that ultimately they're better off scuttling the economic relationship, they will do it. And that could hurt us badly down the road if we were to get deeply integrated with China economically. So I think we need to distance ourselves, but I also believe that I think that we do not want to hurt ourselves in the process, so we should do it gradually. My recommendation, my prescription is that what we do is wherever security is directly at issue, things like, maybe 5G network, some of the apps that we have chosen to ban where there is a direct security threat, we have to disengage right away. I don't think security can be compromised. On other matters where there is no direct security threat, what we should do is we should now engage much more intensively to forge free trade agreements with countries like the United Kingdom, European Union, down the road with the United States as well. I mean, geopolitically, one would argue that there is a bigger case, that we go first with the United States, but that is going to be very difficult for us to do for the simple reason that the United States agriculture is super competitive. And I think we'll have difficulty opening our agricultural market politically. I mean, I personally don't think that Indian farmers cannot compete. They can. But I think politically, this is a hot potato, as we have seen even with very simple reforms, which were awaited for 20 years. And both sides had actually advocated, the Congress as well as BJP and other parties. They've all supported at one time or the other. Now we are still seeing these massive demonstrations against
it on their manifestos.
Yes, and it was there actually in both 2014 and 2019 manifestos of the Congress Party, right? Right. So, and there are clips of Kapil Sibal kind of passionately advocating these reforms. But so it becomes contentious in India. So that's going to be difficult. So, but I think with the European Union and with the United Kingdom, we don't have a problem in agriculture because these are not competitive sectors of Europeans. And if anything, we would actually on agriculture end up gaining some larger market share in European Union and the United Kingdom, if anything. So that threat is not there. Other things we can manage. We will need to open our markets, obviously, things like automobiles, wine and spirits. And so, these are items that are closed for Europeans. But then we will get tariff-free, duty-free access to the European markets and all the other products, and particularly clothing and footwear and whatever else that we can export, So that's where, and so that way we move away from China gradually, so that over a longer term, our dependence on China is reduced. So that is my kind of set of recommendations that we should follow.
Sure. Arvindji, if you're okay with it, I mean, I have many questions, but I thought we could just, make it a little interactive, and some of the questions that are coming in on Facebook. So Sayukta Ghosh has this question. Can you comment on India's cultural industries and the growing potential of the heritage sector in the context of globalization?
Look, our soft power, as we'd like to call it, is greatly underexploited, almost unexploited. So most certainly, these are industries that I don't know myself well, but I know India's heritage quite well, India's history quite well. And there are a lot of efforts right now, our leading artists kind of bringing in the artisans from the hinterland and so forth, modernizing them. And today it is really very much doable as well, because, the internet offers us that facility. That even smaller entrepreneurs can use the platforms of Amazon and whatever else, other portals that exist. So I think it is something for us to do. But one thing I would say is that what we need to do, however, is try to get some scale on these things. Our problem really, Amish, is that we try to do things in sort of isolation, a single artisan doing his or her stuff and all. We need to bring them together. I mean, even if you look at this looms industry and, a lot of fantastic work done by hands, nobody does anywhere in the world, incredible artistic work and all. But when they're in isolation, the costs are high, and you can't mobilize larger market. What we need is, some bit of unification of the industry, entrepreneurs who will bring large number of entrepreneurs under a single roof and then nurture and bring them up. Because then they can also connect them to the global markets and all. And there's a lot of demand, a lot of the specialty stores in the US. In fact, that's where I began to see India's, after India opened up, and when India's products began to show up, they first began to show up actually in the specialty stores in the United States, at least, where I saw this. But we ultimately have to get to the larger ones, Walmarts and so forth. That's where and so that is what we have not been very good at. Chinese have been fantastic on scale. They really get to the scale, and we have really sort of left our artisans, etc., in these small little enterprises, and that creates a problem.
No, the wise words, true. I mean, we're a continental economy. If we have to make an impact, we have to scale things up.
We have to scale.
All diamonds will not work. Arvindji, there's a message I got from Professor Atul Shah, who's a professor here in London. And so he's asking, for those who haven't had the pleasure of reading your book as yet, if you could summarize the theses of the book, for those who haven't, so that they can kind of check out the book. And also, he said rightly, actually, because many of us who track India closely would know of the reforms, but he's not aware of the nature of the reforms that have taken place. So if you could kind of just recount that as well.
Perfect. Thank you, and thanks to Professor, for giving the opportunity. Perfect. So I'll take, I think I can do the summary of the book, basic idea, a basic underlying theme of the book. We've been talking around it right now, but I'll put it in perspective. So begin first with, this is the book's point is that we are a nation really of operating in small units. So if you take farming, for example, farming in India employs about 42% of India's workforce based on 2018-19 survey by the National Statistical Office. But what are these farms like? 70 million, or about 48% of all farms in India, are less than half hectare. The average size of these farms is only 0.23 hectare. No, nobody can really make a living on such a tiny farm. Moreover, productivity would also tend to be low because mechanization, etc., which is what drives the high productivity in countries like the United States, is very limited in such farms, if any. That's the farming kind of point of smallness. Then you come to industry and services. Once again, India is really heavily populated by very tiny little enterprises. Only about, based on that same survey, 9 to 10% of India's workforce, of total workforce, agriculture plus industry, only 9 to 10% of that is in enterprises that have 20 or more workers. Now, by any stretch of imagination, 20 workers is not a large firm, but that's how the data are collected. But if you were to really ask the question, how many are in enterprises with 200 or more workers, which would be a more decent sort of minimal definition of a large enterprise. It's obviously less than 10% because 10% is all you have in enterprises with 20 or more workers. So again, and in these enterprises, I also provide the evidence that the value added, meaning output per worker, is extremely low. Output per worker in here is nothing larger than output per worker in agriculture. These are very tiny little enterprises working with very limited minimal capital. So at the end of the day, these enterprises cannot compete in the global economy. They're not even linked into the global economy. We do need medium and large enterprises. Now, one direct comparison, if you want to do, I have data from 2005, which I provide in the book. In manufacturing alone, 85% of India's workforce was in small enterprises, meaning less than 50 workers. In China, that proportion was less than 25%. 50% was in large enterprises, more than 200 workers. Another 25% in medium, which is about 50 to 199 workers. That's a big difference. Now, what happens is that when you got medium and large enterprises, small ones will have to compete against them also, or they become their ancillaries. Their productivity is also larger. So in the small enterprises in 2005, wages in these small enterprises, or productivity really, labor productivity, was about 60% of what it was in the larger enterprises. In India, it was only 20%. Now, already our productivity is low in the large enterprises, and in the small ones where you got 85% of the workforce, it's only 20%. So that is the problem. We need an ecosystem in which medium and large enterprises can flourish. That's what we need. And once, if we can raise this proportion of workforce employed in medium and large enterprises to even 50%, that will also raise the productivity big time in the small enterprises. It will also pave the way for a lot of these farmers who are dependent on these tiny little farms to move and gain employment in these medium and large enterprises. Or even then the small will become more productive, and therefore they'll provide good employment opportunities as well. So that is the underlying thesis of the book, and the rest of the book is about how do we do that. So a lot of the reforms are outlined there. That's the book. Now to the question on the reforms that have been done just within, I would say last 2 weeks or less probably.
The parliament was working post midnight.
I know. Yeah.
3 days.
Yes. No. They said that it worked on its 100% capacity and productivity something like that, is unprecedented. It doesn't happen. Absolutely. Yes. So to those, the last ones that happened have to do with the labor law reforms. And this is something I've been writing for 20 years. I'm not the only one, many economists have been writing on this. So finally, this is a very contentious area, which is why you can see why for 20 years they had not happened. So the government has now done a decent job. There were 40 different labor laws, which they have now unified into 4 codes. A code on wages, a code on industrial relations, a code on social security, a code on safety as well. So 4 codes which unify most of these laws together, and they have also liberalized. Now, I think it's not as far as we want it to go, but it gives a good base. It liberalizes enough that we can build on that. So that is a very big change, if you ask me. Second, agriculture. As Amish has said already, that it is a 1991 movement, meaning, the big reforms that we have done in 91 in industry of different kind, because we started off with licensing and everything, and industry and trade both. Trade was also subject to licensing that was ended in one stroke by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. So it is, again, in agriculture, for particularly agricultural marketing, was so badly controlled by the state governments in the agricultural produce marketing committees. The farmer was beholden that he or she had to sell his or her product in these mandis that were government mandis, where there was a nexus of the artiyas, as we call them, the intermediaries, who were basically cartelized, and the farmer got very poor price. Now the agricultural reforms that have been done the mandis will remain, but it opens up, opens the door to other mandis coming in, other buyers appearing. If the supermarkets which want to sell produce, as in the United States, UK and all, they can go and buy directly from the farmers. If exporters want to buy directly from farmers, they can do it. They can also now write proper contracts. So there is a legal framework provided that exporters and the farmer can have a contract where the exporter says that, well, I want this particular quality of your produce, and I'll pay this price to you. So for the farmer, the uncertainty is removed. For the exporter also, the uncertainty is removed, because then the produce will be available of the required quality, and farmer gets a good price. So again, fantastic. That's another. So that's the second area of reform. Third is something that I had started, and actually I drafted the legislations when I was at the Niti Aayog. This was in the medical education. So we had drafted 3 legislations at that time. One for allopathic education, which was passed, I think, in Modi 2.0, very first parliamentary session. So that was the National Medical Commission Act that was passed. There were 2 remaining. One was on homeopathy, and another was for the Indian medical systems like Ayurveda and related yoga, etc., Unani. So for that also, there were 2 other legislations which were also passed by the parliament during this 1 to 2 week period. So it really, I've been saying that, reforms have been raining now in the last 2 weeks. And so big moment for at least people like us who have been writing and wanting these reforms to happen for quite a while.
Fantastic. This is a question from Nilima. If India-China economies are closely tied, would they not be less likely to go to war, as there would be commercial interests on both sides wanting to maintain peace? That's a question from Nilima. What do you think, Arvindji?
Yeah. See, that experience comes from Europe. That after the Second World War, the Germany and France were tied up into this European coal and steel community, which later grew up into the European Economic Community and then European Union. So that is the correct example from which I suspect Nima is drawing. But the situation was very different. this was a situation of a defeated power and a victorious power. And the United States, of course, gave shoulder to that very much so, which was part of the victorious coalition at the time, the Allies. This is not the situation here, unfortunately. You see, unless there is, if this could be worked out really, then we would have worked it out with Pakistan first, right? I mean, that rivalry and that problem of hostility and enmity has been far deeper and far longer lasting, with Pakistan. But that simply, is you need some minimal trust to start the economic relationship. And actually, look, in some ways, we had hoped that this would be the case, which is why I certainly supported till Galwan the India going to RCEP. Even though the sense I was getting was that the government was really not warm to it, and generally I'm supportive of the government. But in this case, on trade side, I wanted my view was that we should sign up RCEP. It would be good economically, and it might have helped. But when one side is simply begins to appear very belligerent and aggressive, and it's not, that side is not showing up just on the Ladakh border. Their side is showing up everywhere around, whether it's the United States, whether it's the Europeans, whether it's South China Sea, whether it's Japan, whether it's Australia. So we're seeing it manifested everywhere, So I think in that situation, to forge an economic relationship that could neutralize this aggressive and belligerent behavior, to me, doesn't look very, very probable. And clearly, China wants to be eventually under Xi. I think President Xi himself wants to be the #1 power in the world, displacing the United States. And before it becomes #1, he has to first become #1 in Asia. And which is the country that will be in the way of China becoming #1 power and #1 regional power? It's India. So India faces a serious challenge, more immediate challenge in a way than the United States does. So I think it's a hard thing to do for India to get into a serious economic relationship with China.
No, India desires peace with everyone, but if we are forced into a situation, then what can we do? Yes. There are some more questions that are coming up. Mohammad Nazar has a question for you, Arvindji. Could we think that the Atmanirbhar package can boost the Indian economy and India towards becoming self-reliant?
Okay, so here the term self-reliance itself gets used in many, many different ways. And even though the Prime Minister has sort of himself said that he wants local to be global, which is what I've been saying as well in a different way, that we need to be global. Self-reliance is being sometimes, at least by some, being interpreted to imply that Prime Minister is asking for basically self-sufficiency, meaning, the Nehruvian idea, which, that was the self-reliance idea of Pandit Nehru, that, we should produce everything that we consume. I don't think the Prime Minister is using it in this sense. And I remember I learned that, I heard that speech or watched that speech live when he first mentioned this soon after the COVID. And this was, I think, the May 12th speech. And I heard him to say that, look, he was addressing the entire India. And an average Indian, which is, average Indian is a rural Indian, if you will, median Indian, let's say, is a rural Indian. And so he really was trying to inspire the people that, look, that we need to be aspirational, that we need to be self-reliant, and we should help ourselves. This is the sense in which I sort of interpret that message. Now, there is a separate thing that's going on that was well before Prime Minister's speech, which was the raising of some of the tariffs in international trade. That I have leaned against. I think that is not a good idea for us to go back to the protectionism of the past. We came out of it precisely because it had failed us. That's a separate issue. So now Atmanirbhar Bharat package, when you say as a package, I understand that to be what the finance minister then had unveiled after the May 12th speech of the prime minister over a 5-day period. Monday through Friday, she gave press conferences and unveiled a number of proposals, programs, etc. Those are all very sensible. Within those were actually also a lot of reforms. And just to reinforce what I just said, if you look at the defense part of it, it says Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense. And then one of the measures there is that we will raise the cap on foreign investment in defense industries from 26% to 49%. Right? So if we were talking in the self-sufficiency sense, we'll say that 26% will go back to zero. That's not what we did. And even though the term Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense was used to announce that part of the package, the cap was actually raised. So I think, here Atmanirbhar really Prime Minister is using in the sense of self-reliance, that we really ought to pay our own bills, right? I mean, when I say I'm self-reliant, it doesn't mean I'm producing my own laptops and I'm producing all my own furniture and everything. That's not what it means. It just means that I don't have to borrow from anybody, or I don't have to take a handout from anybody. I earn my own living. And that's, I think, the sense in which self-reliance has to be used, that we should be earning our own living, not having to rely on excessive debt on foreign countries or any aid. We don't take anybody's aid anyway these days. Those days are gone. But even on debt, we are careful. So I think, that's roughly what, to me, self-reliance means. And that's, I think, was the Prime Minister's intent as well.
Welcome. There's a question from Hari Chaitanya. Arvindji, what's the additional uplift in agriculture growth that you expect from the reforms, from the new laws? And what are the implementation risks in the agri reforms that have just been passed?
Yes, I think, to answer the second first, some of the risk may come in if somehow, this at the state level. Remember that agriculture in Indian constitution is broadly a state subject. Some of the things do fall under the central, central government can do a few things, like interstate trade in agricultural produce is what the central government do, under which these reforms have actually been introduced by the central government. But implementation often is at the state level, and if the states, for example, if somebody wants to create an alternative private mandi, some land will be required. Now, if the state governments refuse to or delay the provision of land, that clearly can slow down. So certainly, at the implementation level, difficulties will be there. But the reform is wide enough in the sense that it also allows supermarkets to buy, private traders to buy directly from the farmer and all. So I believe in the power of profit. I believe in the power of entrepreneurship. And so eventually, even though things will happen slowly, and this is why, there's no doubt that implementation challenges are bigger in India, which is why the reforms take root and the impact is after a lag, but you can't stop it. Once the law has been changed, you can delay it a little bit, but you can't really stop it. Now, impact on growth, we will see. Remember one thing, again, we should understand this, that agriculture in the end now is only 15% of the GDP. So, and there are two facts. One is that it is now only 15% of the GDP. The other fact to understand is that, agriculture is not a sector which grows extremely rapidly. Over the 70-year period that if we take from 1950 onwards, agriculture has grown about 3.5% on a sustained basis. In the best of the times, it will grow 4%. So that is the limit. And you can see that with 15% share in the GDP, 4% growth can contribute only 15 times 0.4. That's 0.04. That's just a 0.6% contribution to the GDP is the best that can happen from agriculture as far as GDP growth is concerned. The reforms are more about actually the farmer's income. Farmer today does not get a good price. So whatever is the value added, very large part of it ends up, there's a lot of wastage and pilferage that happens in the mandis, in the government-run mandis. So easily 25 to 30% of the produce is destroyed or rots there. Then the price that the farmer receives also ends up being significantly lower than, so if you look at what the consumer has paid and what the farmer receives, today it's probably like 25 to 30%. What the farmer receives is 25 to 30%. And that's because markets are not competitive. Now, what these reforms do is open marketing. The farmer is now free to go and sell to whosoever the farmer wants to sell her output to. That ought to change the price and move it in favor of the farmer and against the intermediaries and so forth. It'll also lead to organizational changes that, larger firms will come in, consolidators will come in, and so marketing will become more efficient. Again, it'll take a little while, but it'll happen. So I think this is where the impact of the reform is going to be, changing the farmer's income. And to the extent that higher income does lead to also higher production, because the incentive then is greater, profitability, that profitability rises. It will have some impact on output also. But again, with the qualification that I already gave you, that as far as GDP is concerned, the impact is going to be minimal.
But Arvindji, just a follow up on that question. Considering the large proportion, nearly half the workforce which is still in agriculture or agriculture related things, will it be that this will actually help reduce poverty drastically? Is that a...
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. Because if you look at where are India's poor, I've done some numbers, and about almost 80% of India's poor are in rural India. Not all rural India is farmers. Nevertheless, a very large part of that is farmers. So absolutely. No, I think this is whole, in a way it connects back to, remember, Prime Minister had said, I want to double the farmer's income. So we know that the farmer's income is very low, but still all the more reason, therefore, to try to double it. And so it certainly will help the poor. And mind you, you would think, draw no conclusions about the impact on the people. When I said about GDP, that's an output, something different. The very reason why the government and everybody else focuses so much on agriculture is precisely because so many people are employed in agriculture. So many people depend on agriculture. So it's not from the national welfare perspective, this is not an unimportant sector. So by no means do I want to convey the message that it is an unimportant sector. No, far from it. Because no other sector employs 42% of the workforce. Admittedly, over time we need to move this workforce into industry and services, but that's a long drawn process. But in an immediate way, these reforms go a long way towards actually helping the farmers who are the poorest farmers. And by the way, even as far as rich farmers are concerned, they already get the MSP. They are the ones who are,
that's true.
Yeah, so they are already selling their, and partly I think some of the anger is also because of this, that there were a lot of these intermediaries who were buying this produce from the farmer at a very low price. And then they turn around and sell it to the government at MSP, because these small farmers often are not even able to go to the mandi, so they really procure it from, so they are the ones who get to procure it from the small farmer, and then they sell it at MSP. Now that access will be reduced now, because farmers say, hell with it, I'm going to sell it to somebody who is giving me a better price. So many other agents can appear now to bid for the produce of the farmer. So that also is part of the reason, that there is so much opposition that is going on in Punjab and Haryana. And remember that this is where the most procurement happens, by the way. Punjab and Haryana is precisely where most of the procurement at MSP is taking place.
Correct.
So it's no coincidence that a lot of the anger has come from Punjab and Haryana.
Fascinating. What a fascinating conversation, Arvindji. And as usual with you, wonderful mix of deep wisdom and insight, but presented in a really relaxed, easy way that even those who who are not deep into finance or economics can truly understand it. I would recommend to all of you very strongly. Please do check out these books. They are available in India. It's being sold as India Unlimited, and outside of India, it is the New India. The covers have been displayed for you on screen. They're available in bookstores and all online stores. Do check them out. I hope you like them, and I hope indeed that you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Arvind.
Terrific. It was terrific, Amish. Thank you for hosting me. Not only it was terrific, but it was an honor to be with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Arvindji. Thank you.